How relevant is the sacrifice of Sikh soldiers in the world wars to the community today? Again, that's how relevant is the sacrifice of Sikh soldiers in the world wars to the community today? And we're going to start with Jasmine Singh.
Okay, so how relevant is the sacrifice of Sikh soldiers in the world wars to the community today? Personally, I think that recently we've been the victims of a propaganda war whereby there's been a notion to align Sikh values to British values. In 2012, we received headlines of when, quote, a Sikh soldier makes history as he guarded the Buckingham Palace wearing a turban instead of the traditional bearskin. In July 2018, we also received front page headlines of when a, quote, Coldstream Guard soldier had become the first to wear a turban during the Trooping the Colour parade. In late 2018, a statue of a Sikh soldier was erected in Smethwick, Birmingham, to honour Indian soldiers who fought during World War I. On one hand, there appears to be gross glorification of Sikhs in the imperial forces, whether in the past or the present, and on the other hand, the British appear to have amnesia of the inhumane, barbaric atrocities committed by the imperial state to suppress the Sikhs in Garsh. There's no mention of the international conspiracy of the Ghadar Party, founded in America by Kartar Singh Sarabha, in order to plan a mass mutiny across the British Indian Army whilst Europe was engaged in the battles of World War I. There's no mention of a Brahmin soldier called Brema, who began a plot to kill the British agent in charge of Punjab, who was called John Lawrence, to restore Khalsa rule over Punjab. There's no mention of Bhai Maharaj Singh, for example, who fought vigorously and valiantly against colonial forces but was eventually caught and exiled to Singapore, where he was solitary confined for the rest of his life. There's no mention of the British state offering hunting licenses to Patiala royals in order for them to hunt Akali Sikhs like indigenous Australians. Or even yet still, there's no mention of the British that tried to auction the Darbar side. There's no mention of the British Rawalpindi experiments where they tested mustard gas on brown Sikh soldiers to see whether the mustard gas would be more efficient on their skin before commencing the chemical warfare in World War II. It's clear the pro-British stance is hyper-expressed, whereas the real Banthik stance is completely suppressed. All these elements of dissent mentioned above are being whitewashed in front of our own eyes when we choose to swallow the state propaganda that aligns Sikh values to British values. Sikhs that played a part in the world wars, it's true they are still part of the Qawm. However, Britain is using their involvement as a stereotype for a model minority community of what they should portray themselves to be. Truth is, outside of British colonisation, Sikhi has its own political structures, such as the Sarbat Khalsa, it has the Akal Takht, it has Panj Pyare, etc., etc. It is a sovereign nation, and the epitome of Sikh politics is not engagement in Western politics. Instead, it has its own unique parameters and power structures created by the Guru Granth and the Guru Panth. From Gurbani itself, we can see Nanak Raj Jalaya, such support Satani Neev there. Guru Nanak himself has established Raj on the foundations of truth itself. That's very different to the foundations of the British Empire. In the words of Ratan Singh Pangu, a very revered Sikh poet and hagiographer, we can see Khalso hove khud khuda jim humi ho khudai, Aan namane aan ki ek sache bin badshah. The Khalsa is as autonomous as the will of nature itself, never submitting to the sovereignty of another except the true Badshah. This is in gross contrast to the Sikhs that participated in British Army in World War I and World War II. To summarise, I think the sacrifice of Sikh soldiers in World War I and World War II is overplayed, as it was only a small amount that actually participated. Instead, this participation has almost become a tool of propaganda, reflecting a one-side biased view of events. This one-side view obliterates and whitewashes Sikh resistance to the British Empire in the past as well as the present, and it also whitewashes British-mediated atrocities upon the Sikh Panth. By issuing propaganda to model Sikhi closer to the imperial state, it seems as though our Qawm is caught in the middle of a psychological warfare battle. Backed by Gurbani and Guru Itihas, it appears that it's clear that there's no space for Sikhi in the colonial projects of Britain and its military campaigns for the battle of oil, privatisation, water and land, as it infringes upon the philosophy, politics and sovereignty of Guru Khalsa Panth and Guru Granth.
Just to clarify, Jasmine, so the acts of mutiny and rebellion that you mentioned, would you say they are better images of Sikh values or Sikhi as a whole in terms of representing the faith in comparison to Sikh participation in the World War?
So personally, I don't think I'm in the position to say what's more of a Sikh value or not, but personally I do think there is a definite whitewashing of occurrences when the Khalsa Panth has stood up to the British Empire, backed by Gurbani itself. It writes that Khalsa itself is autonomous, and so why do we assert that we fought in the World Wars? Why are we proud of that? We should be proud instead of Saragarhi, where Sikh soldiers fought against masses of Afghan soldiers under the British Army. We should be proud instead of the Jamkor di Gadi, where 40 of the Sikh soldiers fought against almost 1 million Imperial Mughal forces instead, and we should not be proud of the British involvement.
Dr. Priya Akbar, a topic you most likely know a lot about. How relevant is the sacrifice of Sikh soldiers in the world wars to the community today, in your opinion?
I think it's not fair to say that you shouldn't be proud of those soldiers. Because, I mean, look, I 100% agree that Ghadar and all of these other, resistance struggles they should deserve, rightly so, to be remembered. They went hand in hand, though. That's the thing, right? And Jasmine, I agree with you that there has been a massive overplaying, and then a propaganda element. I definitely think so. I mean, I think there's a range of issues with that, and some of it is just, the way we see a diversity agenda operating, that, oh, hang on a minute, we need to incorporate brown histories as well, so that's an easy one to pick off the shelf and sell. There's also a very right-wing issue with this, and that is where the Sikh contribution has been massively overplayed, and the involvement of Muslims, on the other hand, for example, has been downplayed, when we know that there was also a massive Punjabi Muslim, Pathan, etc. involvement, and it's this thing about, as you rightly said, the model minority, Sikhs being made out to be the model minority and others being made into the bad guys. Do you see what I mean? And it's very convenient what bits of history are remembered and what are not. So yes, I think it's hugely critical that we remember Ghadar and we remember everything else that went on in terms of a resistance. I mean, I'm sorry, you mentioned Bhai Maharaj Singh and Brahma. You didn't mention Rani Jindagur in terms of the ultimate resistance. You know what I mean? But so I mean, I could comment it from a gender perspective too. But I think to go the other way and not think about the sacrifices that those soldiers made, right, would be a mistake as well. Because when you look at what they had to say, from, again, always primary sources, but look at them critically, when you look at those soldiers, what they had to say, and how they understood the situation in the times that they were in some, I mean, I'm not saying all of them, but I'm saying at least some soldiers in amongst those soldiers that went to France or to Mesopotamia or wherever, thought that they were in their own way making a contribution to getting freedom, right? And that was the climate of the time in India, right? I mean, even Gandhi later on at that point was saying that we should support this war effort in order to seek independence, right? We have always had in our Panth, we have always had a wide range of political opinions, a spectrum, right? And we are always going to, I think, right? And that's the thing, we have to recognise that. And if you shun one aspect of our history, then we're not doing ourselves any favours. I think you are continually internally sowing the seeds of division, right? And we have to remember that, Sikhs in Punjab were recruited for a reason, because they were largely illiterate, and that was thought to be them, they would be likely to be more loyal, and they were subject to British propaganda. And that's important too, and the choice that they are victimised, and they're sent as lambs to the slaughter, right? But they do, many of these people go because they need to earn money for their families, and they're putting their lives on the line in order to do that. And some of them also believe, and you can see that in letters that are in the British Library. I would encourage anyone to go and read them. You can get these books and read them yourself. And what fascinates me as well is when you hear stories about one brother going to fight in the forge and another going and joining the Ghadar movement. All right, well, even the Ghadari Babbe themselves, many Ghadari rebels were previously in the British Indian Army, right? And then they go out to California and whatever afterwards, and then they go and join Ghadar, right? So these histories are connected. We have to look at them all together. But I agree with you in that we have to resist this propagandizing element. So, fine, we've put up a statue of a Sikh soldier at Smethwick. I think, actually, fine, that's a great thing to do. But there's nothing stopping us putting up a Ghadari Baba's statue as well. It's on us too, to put our heroes out there, right? And why stop at that? Why not have a Punjabi Bibi, a war widow, represented as well? Because let's face it wasn't just men that bore the brunt of that war, it was also the women. Okay? So that would be my stance on this. I think we cannot forget, we have to remember that sacrifice, because for too long, it's taken how many years for us to even get that recognition. Not that I am after recognition, because it is a cheap thing, in a sense. But, yeah, I think it's got to be, I'm always all about nuance, I'm sorry, but, I think we've got to have both things together.
Jasmine, if you'd like to.
Yep, definitely. I agree with Priya in that sense that it is definitely a nuanced portion of our history where there were Sikhs on both sides, really. It's also important to remember not only did the Sikh soldiers write letters in favour of the British Empire, there were a few of them that also wrote of their state, of how they were being treated in the trenches, how the actual, let's say the white soldier, if you will, how they were discriminated against, how they didn't enjoy their time there, how they didn't like their food, etc., etc., etc. So to say that these Sikh soldiers that fought in the British Army were mere victims, that is true, but it's also to realise they were conscious of their plight. They did not enjoy being in the British Army as a whole. I'm just generalising here, but there were some elements where they obviously enjoyed. But the main point is that in terms of British history, it is a nuanced approach. We must not fail to recognise the Sikh battle for sovereignty, the Sikh battle for their own Raj, the Sikh battle for their own justice, their own freedoms. And I think with the British propaganda, in hindsight, it does obliterate all of that. It does not allow for a Sikh voice, if you will, to be heard, for their Sikh homeland to be heard. And that's what essentially allows me to take one side of the opinion.
Jaspreet Kaur, do you think that there is space to remember the sacrifice of the Sikh soldiers in the world wars while still being critical of, for example, I think it's just internet. Do you think there's space to recognise the sacrifice of the Sikh soldiers in the world wars whilst also being aware of, for example, what Priya said, that there's a kind of right-wing campaign to frame the Sikhs and their sacrifice in a certain way which fits in with the model minority framework?
Yeah, absolutely. I think as a teacher, what I'm always quite conscious of is making sure, especially with topics like this, that we're not teaching history in binaries. It's not yes or no, it's not this or that. And I think this is a perfect example of that. It isn't a situation where our community should be creating more divisions amongst ourselves of I feel pride, I don't feel pride. That's not how we should be teaching history in that form. And I think I agree with Priya in the sense that, yes, we do need to recognise the sacrifices made. We do need more analysis, more research. I think that's a positive thing in understanding who those Sikhs were, what the sacrifices were, the numbers, the statistics, the primary sources on it, on that side. But then, yes, we also need to recognise the other side of it, that brown bodies and black bodies were being used as pawns within this war. That's what we were. We were bodies. We were making up numbers. We were a tool, we're a resource in this kind of wider imperialist system, which kind of goes hand in hand in what we were saying in the first question about this inherent violence within the colonial system and within the imperial system is what we can see in this First World War and this Second World War as well. But yeah, I think I just really want to emphasise that point that we need to stop, especially with our own Sikh history, teaching it and focusing on binaries of this and that, and you're either on that side or you're on that side, and I won't agree with you if you're on that side, or I won't even debate or have discourse with you if you're on the other side. That's really problematic. We need to stop doing that. Yeah.
Sarah.
So, I mean, is it relevant? Of course it's relevant. The valour, the honour, the bravery are commendable. Even the Sikh soldiers showed incredible skill and bravery in the battlefield, whether at Saragiri or whether during the First World War or the Second World War. But, and this is where I sort of concur with Jasmine, it came at a price. This skill, this utility was manipulated by the colonial forces. In the first instance with the Great War, after the Great War finished, there was the promise of self-rule, a promise that leaked down through literature, whether got the right or not, to the ranks of the Sikh sepoys who thought that they'd fought for a purpose in these foreign lands, had given blood, money and material for a reason. It became very quickly apparent that those lies were that sacrifice had come for nothing, because they were treated as their fellow Sikhs and Punjabis were treated as second-class citizens under the Rowlatt Act, and of course there was the Jallianwala Bagh. In that time, until the Second World War, those sepoys still wanted to fight for colonial rule, to continue colonial rule after continual years of lies. So while we have to recognise the sacrifice on the one hand, we cannot ignore the fact that there was a great deal of manipulation, that there were sepoys in the Jallianwala Bagh who shot upon their own, that there were those who within the Harmandir Sahib who gave a saropa to General Dyer, that there were those who gave money to the Morning Post Fund when General Dyer was forcibly told to retire. They gave money willingly. So it's relevant, but we have to reframe it in the correct context. To erect a statue is great, it admires their valour and their skill, but it's convenient for the and post-colonial narrative to say, these good Sikhs who fought for our cause, let's commend them, but let's ignore the Bhagat Singhs, the Udham Singhs. In fact, when Udham Singh did what he did in 1940, his act was framed as an isolated event, as a psychotic, not as an avenger, not as someone who's carrying the hopes and strength of the Sikhs and the Punjab. And what happened, they still wanted to dismiss him. And it took until the mid-90s before you could read his transcript. So that is the post-colonial narrative that sits uncomfortably alongside the fact when we recognise Sikh sacrifice.
Just two quick follow-up questions, just being aware of the time. I'll pose this one to you, Jasmine. Seeing members of the Sikh community, I believe 15 pledged £25,000 each, the best part of £400,000 towards another war memorial for the Sikhs, when there's a lot of agreement here on the panel that there should be markings of memorabilia for other revered Sikhs within our community here in the UK. How does that make you feel? Do you think that's something to be concerned about, that there's still ever more money being put towards recognising the sacrifice of Sikh soldiers ahead of so many others?
Yep, I think once again it's an education problem. In terms of education, it's important to know, like Pri was saying, like Josh was saying, like Sora was saying, it's important to know it was a nuanced event. There were people on both sides. But what we see now is with people pledging money, you only start to see one side of the story, when in reality you have people like the Gadars, you have people like Udham Singh. There are people on both sides, so in that sense, it's important that we counteract the narrative by building statues of Gadars, of Udham Singhs, etc., etc. And I think, once again, an education problem where people fail to see the nuanceness of it, of the event.
again. Quite a difficult question, so forgive me in advance, Jaspreet, but I'll pose it to you. The question about how relevant the sacrifice of Sikh soldiers is to the community today. How do we view that when we look at situations like that of Jagtar Singh Johal, the detainee of the Indian government who's not been officially charged with anything, has been kept detained for over a year now, when his campaign team have come out and clearly said that they feel there's a lack of government support from the British government towards them reaching out to their Indian counterparts and resolving the situation of Jagtar Singh Johal.
Well, this was a point I was going to make before, that on that same note of Sikhs being used as pawns within both of these wars, a year after the First World War, in 1919, we had this event in Jallianwala Bagh. After the Second World War, just a few years later, our homeland is partitioned. In those years, the Sikh issues, concerns, interests were not a focus for the British government. In the 1980s, we see the same thing. And it's still apparent with this issue with Jagtar Singh Johal. He's a UK national who is a part of the UK, and he's still being detained in India today. And the fact that that's not being given any recognition, no support from the British government is just this. It's a reoccurring theme of what we've seen over the last 100 years. This is nothing new, what we see happening right now.
Any questions from the audience? Any input from the audience? I have a question. Start with VJ. Had a question for the verse, so we'll start with you.
Talk about education, but a lot of this has been ingrained by a kind of post-colonial and pre-colonial kind of message of divide and conquer from the Midlands, and there's a strong us and them kind of quality between Sikhs, Hindus, Muslims, and that's very hard to get over. That's why people feel proud of that stuff that we'll look to and they ignore, being Muslims. So how do you get past that discourse, right? Because this is still promoted now. When I was young, the army had a big presence actually in the United Kingdom. They actively recruited Sikh boys from other kingdoms. But it's how do you get past that? And how do you educate when people are so entrenched in this 60s and 70s? I'll be up the key so that they don't be me up, right? How do you get past that?
If it's okay, I will ask just Priya to answer that, because I thought it was a very good point to make that there isn't, as far as I'm aware anyway, campaigns for statues for Muslim soldiers, which was a great point that you made. So is the kind of individualism of us saying, look, we're Sikhs, we're the great warrior soldiers of the world wars, is that something that plays a part in this kind of divide and conquer? And if so, how do we get past it?
Thank you, Aaron, for your question. Aaron's a long-term friend of mine. Of course it's a difficult one, because, you've got the bad blood of partition, which is the immediate factor here. And, so the generations of sort of our parents, grandparents that came over, many of them had that legacy weighing heavily on their shoulders. But on another side of it, we're seeing our younger generation today, certain sociological research is showing that we supposedly the sort of second, third generations are embracing their religious identities in a more hardline way as well. In that, in some cases the parents' generation were very much, either coming as Indian or Pakistani, and then, Hindu, Sikh, Muslim separate, because, you're facing a majority white community. But supposedly as time is going on, we're becoming more sort of narrower in our religious identities and trying to really get to an essentialized identity, right? Putting that aside for a sec, I think the only way, I don't know, maybe this is really simplistic, the only way is if we reach out to each other. And, you actually engage in a dialogue with your neighbours, essentially. In many respects, the problems that we've been talking about, whether it be Sikh soldiers being sent as cannon fodder, or our education system not reflecting our perspectives enough, you know, whether it's an ethnic minority amongst each other, or whether it is, you know, ethnic minorities versus, say, white working class, there's always a divide and rule thing going on. But we actually have more in common than divides us, I think. We're just not aware of it. We're not made aware of it. So I don't want to blow my own trumpet, but recently I was involved in a really lovely project, okay, and it was trialing just this idea about bringing Hindu, Muslim and Sikh people together on a World War I research and exhibition project, together with white British people who work at the Soldiers of Oxfordshire Museum on military history. They had never been exposed to an Asian perspective on World War I before. And obviously we've been all talking about this sort of Islamophobia thing, but we're not in this country today, apart from my little project, had a World War I commemorative project that works across communities in that way. And I can tell you from experience, we had, I won't go on for ages, Jasper, I promise you. We had a Gujarati, sort of 70-year-old retired physicist as one of our team, and then we had young sort of Sikh, Hindu, Muslim undergraduates from history, and getting that, and as amongst others, and getting everyone to work together. Of course it was a challenge. You had a generation gap, you had different perspectives on history, you have very different religious, social background things, but it can happen, right? We produced this mini exhibition that toured around Buckinghamshire and Oxfordshire, very white British areas, and we had dawn workshops, we had poetry things going on, we had all sorts of stuff, and it really generated a conversation, okay? It was really fun. For me, it was an absolute joy to be a part of, and I learned a lot as well. For me, stepping out of academia and working with just, you know, and helping people, anybody to train research was huge. And what was amazing was that it kind of changed everyone who was involved in that project, their perspective on that war. You had to deal with difficult questions, but you had to come together and build consensus about it if we were going to make this project happen. So, and we did that on £12,000 worth of funding. Okay, that technically is peanuts in the scope of many things. But what I would really like to see happen, if I can put out a little punt to the group that are here today, why can't we raise more money for projects like that? Okay? And I mean, we didn't shy away from Gathered, we didn't shy away from colonial legacies. Those were all in the exhibition panels that the research team, you know, these volunteers wrote themselves. Okay? So it can be done if you put an effort in. And that was a government-funded grant, actually, AHRC. But, you know, if we're going to build statues and we're going to do things like that, can we do something else too? Can we do projects like that? We're all aware of the problems now. Maybe that could be a solution.
Very quickly, Jaspreet, very quickly.
Super quick point. There's an example of no pennies being provided. So, as many of you might know, as well as being a history teacher, I'm also a poet. The arts scene definitely doesn't get many pennies at all. But a way of, you mentioned reaching out, an interesting project that I might be working on later on this year to do with partition is a few other spoken word poets, Muslim spoken word poets from Punjab but on the Pakistan side, as well as myself and some other Sikh poets, are thinking about doing a collective together about partition, but including both perspectives. And that's just another kind of interesting example through the arts and through the creative scene that it could be done as well, that we, I don't know if we want to call it build bridges or just to see what similarities we have, what differences we have, and how, yeah, we might actually have more in common than we think. But yeah, that's another interesting way it could be done.